Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel, guys. This video is filmed Monday evening. Let me start by saying, not feeling my best today. You guys may be able to hear that, maybe slightly nasal coming through, so apologies in advance, but we'll try and battle through it. Lots to discuss in this video. We're going to be discussing a lot of the action from the weekend. To be honest, I've given preference on my channel to the Hughie Parker fight. And perhaps I haven't covered some of the other bits, so I want to look back at Gilberto Ramirez versus Jessie, Hart, Luke Campbell versus Jorge Linares, Dorticos versus Kudryasov in the Super Series. I want to talk some of the major news in boxing: Eddie Hearn signing Danny Jacobs, Frampton working with Frank Warren, and also want to talk about Eddie Hearn's Monaco bill, which he announced today. So a huge amount to cover in this video. I'm actually going off to the States on Saturday, and I'm going to be off for a couple of weeks. So I want to get some coverage in and up on the channel now, because it's highly likely that during that period I'll be uploading extremely infrequently, if at all. And unfortunately, I'm going to miss some good bits of boxing, because as you guys know, boxing is absolutely buzzing at the minute. But I'll be back for middle to late October, so certainly back for Joshua and for Lewison versus Joe Joyce and all of those good stuff. But sometimes life comes first. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about Jorge Linares versus Luke Campbell. Split decision. One of the judges had Luke Campbell winning. I believe Eddie Hearn's come out and he said that it's the wrong decision and that Luke Campbell, in his opinion, deserved to win the fight. I personally scored it to Jorge Linares, 115-112. However, it was an extremely close competitive fight, and there were a number of rounds that I had to watch a second time, or else I would have scored 10-10 off initial viewing. Now, scoring around 10-10 is perfectly acceptable to do. Judges are allowed to do it. But the truth is that judges don't do it. And it's highly irregular for professional boxing judges to actually score rounds as a 10-10 round. So if I look at a fight and if I see a round being 10-10, I'm inclined sometimes to give that round a second look and to pick a winner, because I believe that way you're mirroring what the pro judges will do. So using that technique, because I thought there were a lot of rounds, there were probably 3 or 4 rounds in this fight that I thought I can't split them on first viewing. But using that technique, I've given it to 115-112. I actually thought the Sky commentary was fairly average. I thought they had Luke Campbell too far behind in the first half of the fight. Then they probably realised from Twitter and the likes that people were scoring it more competitively, and I thought in many ways they actually gave him too much credit in the second half of the fight. But Luke Campbell came out. He looked to push the pace early on. He looked to get his jab off and focus on using his range and using his distance. He was a notably bigger, taller, longer man than Jorge Linares, and he looked to use that size difference in the ring by getting his jab up and running. I actually thought Luke Campbell started the fight fairly well. He was landing some good work to Linares' body, and in the second round I actually thought Luke Campbell was putting on a fairly good showing. I had Luke Campbell ahead in the second round for the majority of the round. Then Linares kind of decided to just come on the front foot for 1 second and put a combination together. And within seconds, Campbell was knocked down, and it was a pretty crisp knockdown. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't in danger of getting stopped. He got back up, but it was a pretty clean, crisp knockdown from Jorge Linares. And you know, Linares, when he put punches together, when he put combinations out there, they looked really, really snappy, and he looked like a really dangerous fighter to me. Campbell was perhaps adopting a more volume approach in this fight. Campbell was routinely looking to come forward, but for me, the higher quality of work on the whole came from Jorge Linares. His work was just a lot more dynamic, a lot more decisive, a lot swifter, snappier, etc. One of the things with Campbell I felt is that, and his trainer was giving him this advice, so I'm not going to pretend that I've spotted something that no one else has here, but one of the things I see with Campbell in this fight is when he was first to lead off, he was doing alright, you know. In many ways, there were elements of his fight that reminded me of a a Vladimir Klitschko type performance. You know, he was the taller guy, he was using reins, he was standing up, and when he was able to lead off with the jab and throw things off the jab and get his right hand going, having got that jab working, he was fairly decent. But there wasn't necessarily that depth of variety and adaptability to his game. When Linares came forward, Campbell went back in a straight line. His chin was straight up in the air. At that point, he was looking a bit upright, a little bit robotic. And that's kind of what we saw in the second round with that knockdown. You know, Campbell doing well. Linares puts him on his back foot. You know, Linares puts the pedal to the metal probably for 2 seconds, and, you know, Luke Campbell just goes straight back, upright, and gets caught and gets dropped. The middle rounds were very tight, very cagey rounds. Linares, I must admit, Linares didn't look fantastic in there. Campbell put on a far better showing than Mitchell and Crawler in terms of negating some of Linares' work. And credit goes to Campbell for that, but I did think, on the whole, Linares had just about done enough to retain his belts. I thought Campbell was very close. And I'd say, even though I've scored it to Linares by 3 rounds, I would say it was an exceptionally competitive fight. And it is a fight that I believe could have gone either way. We've had a lot of debatable judging decisions in boxing recently. Hughie Fury versus Parker, Golovkin versus Canelo. This is another one. It's maybe not a fight that's caught the public's imagination to the same extent, but it's another one where there's a bit of a debate as to which way it would go. And I've said this on other fights, but I think there's a range of acceptable scores here. And I think if you have this fight a draw, if you have Linares by a couple, if you have Luke Campbell, maybe if you have Luke Campbell by 1, etc., I think those are all acceptable scorecards. Because it kind of depends what you like to an extent. And this was a nip-tuck battle. I did think that Campbell's work, size, output, did take away some of the class from Jorge Linares that we saw against him in Crawler. You know, I don't think Linares was able to box rings around Campbell like we've seen in the past. And credit goes to Campbell for that. You know, Linares is a very, very good fighter. The fact that Campbell put on such a good showing against him, for me, tells me that Campbell probably is the kind of fighter who could win a world title. You know, Campbell versus Terry Flanagan, I see that as a competitive fight. I just think that against Linares, he came up against a guy who's a good world champion. And whilst I think Luke Campbell can win a belt, I don't think Luke Campbell is an elite fighter. And I think Jorge Linares is somewhere in between that world level to elite level fighter. You know, I'm not going to say he's one of the best fighters in the world. I'm not going to say he's a pound for pound top 10 fighter, because I don't think he is. But I think he deserves to be in the discussion when you're talking about elite level talents. And I do believe, in my opinion, that he is the #1 lightweight in the division, on the basis that Mikey Garcia we no longer class as a lightweight. So fair play to both guys. I heard after the fight that Luke Campbell's father died 2 weeks before the fight, and you know, that kind of puts things into perspective a little bit. Look, if that was me personally, I don't think I'd be able to take the fight. So credit to Campbell for doing that. It shows a huge amount of dedication to his sport, to his career, and you know, he answered questions in this fight. He showed immense mental fortitude, and he put on a showing to be proud of. So fair play to Luke Campbell. People don't like Eddie Hearn, but Eddie Hearn is a good man for Luke Campbell to be with at present. Hearn will navigate him and get him another shot, I'm sure. Hearn's got enough big cards and enough big fighters to bring Campbell back, slip him into a few undercards, maybe get him a few domestic fights. Maybe he could fight the winner of Crawler Burns, etc. So, you know, we haven't seen the last of Luke Campbell. He put on a decent showing. He, in my opinion, was the best of the 3 Brits who took on Jorge Linares. And he's been beaten by a very good man under very difficult circumstances. So credit goes to Luke Campbell. Let's switch the pace. Let's talk Gilberto Ramirez versus Jessie Hart. Long-time viewers will know that I'm a big fan of both of these guys. I think I actually first started talking about Jessie Hart on the channel after the Floyd Manny pay-per-view, where he fought on the undercard. And I really liked the look of him there. I thought he was a really talented fighter. Against Gilberto Ramirez, you know, Ramirez is someone I rate very, very highly. I've long talked about him now. and I've said that I believe he's one of the top fighters at super middleweight. This fight was a close fight. You know, the judges scored it very, very close. I think 2 of them had Ramirez maybe by 3 points, and 1 of them had Ramirez by 1 point. I actually had it a little bit wider than that. I thought Gilberto Ramirez did very well in this fight, and I thought Hart showed an immense amount of will to win, immense amount of heart. You know, he's hurt in this fight several times, and he kept coming, and he actually showed good fitness and, you know, will to win, because he came on strong in the second half of the fight for my money. So I give Jesse Hart a lot of credit. You know, this was a huge step up for him. He's not fought at anything like this sort of level, and he's put in a good showing, and he can come again. But I had Ramirez winning it quite comfortably. I'm just looking down on my scorecard now. I think I've given Jesse Hart 5 rounds, and I think I've given Ramirez. Yeah, Ramirez obviously scored the knockdown round 2. So I've scored it 7 rounds to 5 in favour of Ramirez, and I've scored it, one of them a 10-8. So actually, I've got Ramirez winning by 3 points, which is exactly the same margin that 2 of the 3 judges gave it to Ramirez. But having said that, I don't see it as a difficult fight to score. So I've given Linares versus Crolla 3 points to Linares, but I acknowledge that could have gone either way. I've given Ramirez Hart 3 points to Ramirez, but I don't really see how you could give Hart the majority of rounds in this fight. This was another occasion where Ramirez adopted the front foot fighter approach. So he adopted the Joseph Parker and Golovkin approach. Hart adopted the back foot approach, the Canelo and Hughie Fury approach. But I thought there was a key difference in this fight, which is that I think Ramirez's offense was very, very effective. Whereas in the other fights I've talked about, I thought in multiple rounds, Canelo's back foot offense was as effective as Triple G's front foot offense. And I didn't think Parker's front foot offense was effective at all against Hughie Fury. But in this fight, I see it as different. I thought Ramirez's front foot approach was very effective, highlighted by the fact he dropped Jesse Hart badly in the second round. Could easily have been stopped in that second round, and he hurt him very badly on at least 2 separate occasions. Teddy Atlas, who was scoring a fight on the footage I was watching, actually gave the 4th round a 10-8 round to Ramirez, even though Jesse Hart wasn't dropped, because he thought Ramirez was so beaten up and dominated in that round. So, you know, Ramirez had Hart in trouble on multiple occasions on this fight. He caught him with some big punches, and he had Hart hurt routinely. One thing I like about Ramirez is he's a tall guy, he's a rangy guy. He's got a similar physique to like a Callum Smith or a David Benavidez, but he's very versatile. You know, a lot of these tall guys, they kind of do what Luke Campbell did. You know, they kind of do what Vladimir Klitschko did. You know, they just stick the jab out, they become a bit robotic, they become a bit upright, and it's all the basis of just keeping the fight at range. Ramirez is a hell of a lot more versatile than that. I thought his body punching was supremely effective in this fight. The way he was able to close down the gap and put hooks into Hart's body had Hart in a world of trouble, notably in the 4th round. On the inside, he's a real fighter to be contended with. He shortens up his punches very nicely. He can tuck an uppercut in, he can drop a hook in. If you're 6 inches away from Ramirez, even though he's a massive, tall, rangy guy, you're still not safe. This guy has a lethal inside game. If anything, it's almost gone too much that way. You know, he does give up his height in fights. He does fight like a smaller man. And whilst I like to see a versatile fighter, whilst I like to see a fighter who can show different looks, sometimes he can make it a bit easier for himself here. Sometimes he, you know, could just use the jab and could just use range. Maybe more of a blend of the two, because I think in this fight he was comfortably ahead and he ended up getting sucked into a wall. And Jesse Hart was doing the sort of back foot game where he was trying to draw Ramirez onto punches and trying to counter him and trying to catch him. And I do think Ramirez fell into those traps at times. You know, I do think Ramirez took unnecessary punishment, and I do think he could have made an easier job of it. But for me, Ramirez is one of the premium talents at 168, and a lot of people are telling me 168 is quite a weak division. I disagree. I mean, you've got the Super Series tournament, where you've got some big fights, some big fighters in that tournament. Even outside of the tournament, you've got Gilberto Ramirez, Jesse Hart, who I believe can come again, James DeGale, who's the consensus #1 super middle. David Benavidez. Dirrell, both Dirrells, but Andre Dirrell in particular. I mean, you've got some good fighters who aren't even in that Super 8 tournament. And you could make a strong case that the top two in the division are DeGale and Ramirez, who are actually not competing in that 168 division. So, you know, this is an exciting division. There's potentially some good matchups there, and I do believe Jesse Hart can come again. He'll have learnt a lot from that fight, and he showed a lot to like. But Ramirez, for me, is going to be a tough guy to beat. But I do think he needs to use his long-range game a little bit more, because he's got all these natural advantages with his height and with his size. It'd be a shame for them to go to waste. Dorticos versus Kudryasov in the World Boxing Super Series. Not too much to talk about in this fight because it ended so quickly. Quite a feel-out round in the first round. Dorticos ices Kudryasov in the second round. Now, Dorticos, if you look at him, he doesn't look like one of these tremendously athletic guys. He doesn't seem to have electric hand speed. He doesn't seem to have like a hugely muscular build. What he is one of these guys who must naturally just be very, very, very heavy-handed, because the way he hit Kudryasov, and I appreciate it kind of caught him on the top of the head or side of the head, however you want to phrase it, but the punch he landed on Kudryasov, you wouldn't actually think was necessarily a huge knockout punch, but wow, you know, it did the business. So Dorticos, for me, looks like a very naturally heavy-handed guy, which ties in with his KO percentage, which is above 95%. So he goes marching on. A lot of these fights in the World Boxing Super Series are going to be quite grueling 12-round affairs. So the fact that he's got through that fight with the minimal of fuss and it's ended quickly, he hasn't gone through a war, does help his chances. I haven't seen a lot of Dorticos in the past. I understand he won an interim belt and it was then upgraded to a regular belt because he couldn't get a fight with Sumanov. So we'll learn a lot more about him in the next round, where I believe he's due to fight the winner of Gassiev Vladarchik, which will, you know, Gassiev would be a big favourite. So Gassiev Dorticos is certainly a good fight, and he will be one to watch. Looking at Dorticos, he's clearly explosive. You know, he's clearly got heavy hands. He's clearly got power. I'm not 100% sure. He's one to watch, but I'm not 100% sure if he is going to be able to box with a guy like an Alexander Usyk or a Mike Perez. You know, I didn't see the skill level there. Having said that, I haven't seen a lot of him, and that's based on 2 rounds against Kudryasov. Now, obviously, he was a highly regarded Cuban amateur, so when you see that kind of pedigree as an amateur, you instantly think that he's going to have a lot of skill. So maybe he'll bring a different look. But against a guy like Kudryasov is known as a bit of a slugger, a bit of a power puncher. I would have expected a sort of Cuban amateur to try and box him and dance around him a bit, and Dorticos really didn't do that. You know, Dorticos came looking to fight, put his head down and to throw bombs, which is going to make for entertaining fights. Let's see what he's got. You know, not someone I'm going to put all my chips on just yet. Not someone I'm going to bet against either. Interesting to see where this tournament takes him. I think it was Jay on the podcast saying that he thinks these tournaments are going to have some breakout stars who comes from nowhere. Perhaps Junior Dorticos could be one of those. Let's talk about some of the other news in boxing. Big win for Frank Warren. Carl Frampton signs with Frank Warren. For me, just what Frank Warren needed. Another big name who can headline big shows. If you look at Frank Warren's stable, one thing that it's potentially light on is headline acts. Obviously, you've got Billy Joe Saunders. You've got Terry Flanagan. You've got Liam Smith. You've got Hughie Fury. But of those, the only one you'd be confident as having the sort of celebrity to and sort of popularity to be a routine headliner is Billy Joe Saunders. I appreciate Terry Flanagan is a world champion with several defences, but he doesn't seem to have a huge name amongst the boxing population, and I don't believe he is a huge draw in terms of ticket sales and TV views. I think Carl Frampton adds a lot of weight. You know, Carl Frampton is one of the top fighters in the world. He probably is Frank Warren's highest rated fighter in terms of the level he's been operating at. And Frampton is a big name. You know, he's been on pay-per-views, he's fought internationally. he sells tickets. You know, Frampton is a guy who can be involved in big events. And there's big fights out there for Frampton as well. You know, people talk about the Quigg rematch, maybe not. You know, Selby, Russell Jr., third fight with Santa Cruz, maybe even the Rigondeaux Lomachenko winner. There's big fights out there for Carl Frampton, and it's a real win for Frank Warren. Good bit of business from him. So let's see what he does with him, and let's hope he can get him the big fights, because I think that's what Frampton needs. I think Frampton is potentially at his peak. I don't think he's going to get any better, and I think at those lighter weight classes, Frampton's probably not going to be a great fighter into his late 30s. So, you know, really the time with Frampton is now. Let's get him a big fight next year. Let's get him a big fight towards the end of 2018 or the start of 2019. There's no need to rebuild him. There's no need to have 3 or 4 warm-ups with Frampton. Let's get him in big fights now, and that can do a huge amount of positives for Frank Warren and for his broadcasters, etc. So very interesting to see how that plays out and what direction they take him in. Hearn has signed Daniel Jacobs as part of Eddie Hearn's Matchroom expansion into the USA. That's an interesting bit of business, because thinking about it, Danny Jacobs is not going to be the easiest guy to get big fights for. And I talk about that because of the nature of the division. I mean, Canelo and Golovkin may well rematch. I think Canelo's talking about the rematch being in Cinco de Mayo, which is May. You know, so that means that both of those guys would be unavailable for, realistically, at least the next year, because they're not going to want to fight after that till back end of 2018. Even if that rematch doesn't happen, you know, Golovkin's probably going to prefer the Billy Joe Saunders route to unify the titles. Canelo, you know, maybe he'd look at Saunders. But Canelo's a kind of guy who, you know, he's such a big name, he's such a big draw, he doesn't necessarily need to fight a premium competition. And Daniel Jacobs may be viewed as a high risk, low reward type opponent. So, yeah, I'm not sure who Hearn's going to match Jacobs up with. I mean, we talk about Billy Joe Saunders. I don't know if Billy Joe would want to, I don't know if Frank would want to put Billy Joe in with Jacobs. It's a high risk fight, and you think Billy Joe is in such a strong position because that belt he's got, when the whole Golovkin-Canelo situation resolves itself, that belt Billy Joe's got is a very, very, you know, worthwhile belt financially, because they need that belt to unify. So it's very interesting. I wonder if Hearn, and I believe he's said he's going to put Jacobs out towards the end of the year in an effort to get him active, get him busy. I heard Eddie Hearn say that he wasn't going to sign US fighters unless he could, you know, unless he could get them busy. So he's put, I'm just looking it up, yeah. So in November, Jacobs will be fighting the undefeated Luis Arias, who's 18-0. And I believe Hearn has also referred to a potential future fight with David Lemieux. So the intention, it does seem to be to keep Jacobs at middleweight. And certainly the Lemieux fight will be an interesting fight. It's one that I'd favour Jacobs in. And I guess it would be a good acid test for Eddie Hearn and his new business in the States to see, you know, will Jacobs Lemieux be a fight that Hearn can sell arenas out for like he could with his UK stable? It would be interesting to see how it all plays out, but it's an interesting fight, and I think Daniel Jacobs, whilst he is a consensus top middleweight, I actually don't think he's going to be the easiest guy to match up, because he's a tough guy to beat, and I think guys are going to want a lot of money to fight him, and I think some of the major players in the division, the Saunderses, Canelos, Golovkins of the world, are probably going to be tied up with other fights. One thing that did occur to me, Jacobs is a giant for 160, as we know. If in time Jacobs wants to step up to super middleweight, you know, potentially Hearn can do some real good business for him. Obviously, you've got guys Hearn works with like James DeGale, who's already an established name in the States, and James DeGale is not in the World Boxing Super Series, so perhaps he's struggling for a big fight right now. Maybe Jacobs versus DeGale is a fight that Hearn could make. Obviously, if someone like a Callum Smith or a Jamie Cox or a George Groves was taking a loss in the Super Series at some point, Hearn's already got established relationships with those guys and could maybe make the matchup. So, you know, I wonder if in time Jacobs and Hearn will move Danny Jacobs up to the 168-pound division, because I think the options are going to be more more obvious for Daniel Jacobs up at that division. But it's an interesting move, and it will be a key acid test. I think Eddie Hearn's got to make a success of it, because if he doesn't do a good job with Jacobs, American fighters he's looking to sign will question that in terms of whether they want to put their future in Eddie Hearn's hands. Finally, let's talk about this new bill that's been announced today. Eddie Hearn's announced a bill in Monaco, I believe 4th of November. He's announced 4 fights. Jamie McDonnell versus Laborio Solis, the rematch of a fight that took place on Hearn's last Monaco bill a year ago, where McDonnell won in highly controversial circumstances. Most thought Solis had done enough to win the belt. Pleased that rematch is on. Scott Quigg is taking on Oleg Yefimowitz, who is 29-2. I'm going to be honest and say that I haven't heard of Oleg Yefimowitz. So if you've come across him, leave a comment in the section below. Let me know your thoughts on him. Dmitry Bivol, 11-0, fighting for the vacant WBA World Light Heavyweight title, taking on Trent Broadhurst, who's 20-1. Haven't seen anything of Broadhurst. Heard very good things about Bivol. Know he's quite highly rated. So interesting that Eddie Hearn is doing some business there. I was unaware of any history between Eddie Hearn and Bivol. I don't believe they've worked together before. So interesting that Eddie Hearn's doing that and using his Monaco option to build him. You know, I don't know what Hearn's doing, if this is just a one-off fight that he's hoping to sell tickets for in Monaco and, you know, make a lot of money out of, or if they've got some sort of deal arranged and they're looking to work together in future. So again, if you know, leave a comment in the section below. What do you think the method to Hearn's business is here? Where do you think he'll be looking to make a profit? Finally, Ajit Kabayel versus Derek Chisora, who's Eddie Hearn's new signing in the heavyweight division. Kabayel, 16-0, current European title holder, versus Derek Chisora. Now, I haven't seen a lot of Kabayel, but my sources tell me he's actually half decent. He's young, he's 25, so he's not one of these old-timers. He's got a career ahead of him. He's going to have will to win. He had a big win against Christian Lewandowski last year, and has had one defence of the EBU title against Hervé Hubio, who I haven't come across, I must admit. 16 wins, 12 of them by knockout. In terms of names down the resume, Benga Alukan, he beat on a split decision. Lewandowski, who was unbeaten at the time and quite highly rated, if memory serves. So yeah, Chisora is probably a bit of a step up for him, but you know, then again, Chisora at this stage of his career, I think he's got 7 losses now. He's 33 years old. Hell of a lot of miles on the clock for Chisora. So I understand Hearn's going to get Chisora out. Potentially, well, I believe currently Chisora is listed as fighting TBA this weekend on Eddie Hearn's bill in Liverpool. So let's see if that actually happens. Let's see if Chisora gets out. Let's see what kind of you know, shape that Chisora is looking in for that fight. Be interested to see you know, if he's in good nick. But that's a fight that could be interesting, and I'll have to look a bit more into Ajit Kabayel. But some people are telling me that could be a tough fight for Chisora. So let's see. I don't really understand these Monaco shows. I know tickets prices in Monaco are very high. I know it's the kind of place people pay €1,000 for a ticket, but the arenas are so small. Like, I don't really see where Hearn is making his money off these belts, because fighters like Derek Chisora, Jamie McDonnell, I know both of those guys have been paid very well in the past, so I expect they'll have big financial demands. So an interesting bit of business, a bit of business that I don't completely understand, but that's been announced today. As I mentioned, Hearn does have a card in Liverpool this weekend, which is headlined by David Brophy versus Rocky Fielding for the Commonwealth and British titles. Decent scrap, that sort of domestic trade fight. I think Rocky Fielding, you'd have to favour out of those two. And Rocky Fielding needs a win of that nature, because he'll be disappointed he didn't get that Jamie Cox fight. He'll want to position himself so that when this Super Series contest ends, he can be in the mix for a big fight. Now, I'm not saying Rocky Fielding's a world level fighter and an elite level fighter, far from it. But if Groves lost to Eubank in the semis, or if Eubank lost to Groves, you know, Rocky Fielding's the kind of guy they could have a comeback fight against that would do some numbers. So, you know, Rocky Fielding's going to want to keep some momentum and keep winning. So those opportunities come his way. Paul Butler versus Stuart Hall, the rematch on the other card. You got Sean Dodd versus Tom Stalker for the Commonwealth. Tom Farrell versus Zahara Davis, the return of OD. Anthony Fowler versus Jay Byrne, and you got Natasha Jonas, Craig Glover, and Chisora TBA. So lots going on in boxing. Let me know if you've enjoyed this video, guys. Covered a lot in half an hour. If you have enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you haven't done so before, please do subscribe. Many thanks indeed for tuning in.